seems like every time I venture out into the city of Athens, I find something else to love about this place. There's so much to discover and so many cool areas to see that it would take far longer than I have to experience it all. In this video, I'll take you to various parts of town that I like the most, and maybe give you some ideas on where to go if you visit Athens. It will include the neighborhood that I called home for 5 weeks, as well as the one that everyone said was dangerous. I'm still not sure what to think about that place. The first stop is the Syntagma neighborhood, home to Syntagma Square. This is one of those spots where people meet, as two lines of the metro intersect at this place. The surrounding area also contains numerous shops, hotels, restaurants, and cafes. This square is situated in the middle of Athens and is described as many as the figurative heart of the city as well. On one side of the square is the start of Ermu Street, probably the main pedestrian boulevard in a city full of streets that are closed to traffic. When the light between Ermu and the square changes, the flow of people going back and forth is impressive. When I visited, the square was dressed up for the holiday season. This is absolutely the biggest square in Athens and probably the most lively place in the city as well. To come down here and spend a lot of time, you really have to like people. Because it is so crowded, this place at times possesses a carnival-like feel. Musicians perform here frequently. Just off of the square is the Parliament building. Every hour, zones, who are members of the elite presidential guard, change their stations. People line up to watch the spectacle, which plays out over about 10 minutes. Dressed in uniforms which have historic significance, members of the Presidential Guard are stationed full-time at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. It's worth making a point to see this. The second most famous square in Athens, and one that is probably just as busy, is Monastiraki Square. It's located in the Psirri neighborhood. Monastiraki is not as large as Syntagma. The name means little monastery, and the Holy Church of the Virgin Mary Pantanassa still stands in the corner. The square seems to be one of the more popular spots in the city. Monastiraki Square in the Psirri neighborhood always seem busy. It certainly makes you wonder what this place is like in the heart of tourist season. Sometimes you have to break away, get to the edge of the neighborhood just to get a little break. Beyond the square, the Psirri neighborhood is flush with shops and particularly restaurants. There are tons of places to eat, most featuring outside dining options. Right off of the square is a huge flea market. Shops of all kinds can be found walking down the narrow street. This is aimed primarily at visitors, so if you're in need of souvenirs or shirts that will commemorate your trip to Athens, this might just be the place. A little farther out, the Psirri neighborhood has a much more local flavor. I loved all the giant pieces of street art that adorned many of the buildings. There is color and beauty, but it's also important to recognize that many times this is the artist's way of communicating what they feel. Often they are not just speaking for themselves either. The Plaka neighborhood is certainly an attractive part of the city. It sits directly beneath the Acropolis and is said to be the oldest part of Athens. This is where many of Athens' citizens lived in ancient times. Some of the streets, in fact, have the exact same layout as they did almost 2,000 years ago. There is certainly a lot of history here in Plaka, but today it's different. For better or worse, parts of this neighborhood almost look like they've been engineered as the perfect tourist environment. Many of the streets in Plaka are pedestrian only. There are still souvenir shops, but many of the stores here seem to be a bit more on the higher end of the spectrum as opposed to other places in the city. This neighborhood is no doubt beautiful. Its location near some of Athens' most famous tourist sites means that this is a quite popular area. For me, a neighborhood right next door to Plaka is much more intriguing. This is Anafiotika. It looks so much different than other parts of the city. If you didn't know better as you were walking through its narrow pathways, you might think that you were on one of the many Greek islands. There is a reason for that. So the story goes that about 200 years ago, the king wanted some work done on his palace. The carpenters of Anafi were considered the best to be found. They came and settled here just to the north of the Acropolis. They built their homes to look like the island they left behind. it retains that look and feel today. I find it absolutely amazing that this small pocket within Athens has maintained the same sort of aesthetic for a couple of centuries. The people who live here still seemingly feel connected to Anafi Island. Because this is such a unique part of Athens, many visitors want to take a look. This is purely a residential area, however, and there are numerous signs asking that people respect that. It's a good reminder that wherever your travels take you, it's always going to be home for someone. Make sure to treat the places you visit in the same way that you would want those who come to your town to act. Take a moment to go see Anafiotika. Just keep your voice down. Omonia might be the most perplexing neighborhood in Athens. I spent a fair amount of time there, and I was a fan of many of its parts. It is described as a multicultural area that is anchored by Omonia Square. That's a transportation hub and a busy location for shopping. There's some pretty spectacular ruins scattered about. That includes this spot, where there are remnants of an ancient road, as well as tombs that date to the early days of the city. That is near Kotsia Square, which is another open space. It is surrounded by City Hall and a number of other attractive old buildings with interesting architecture. Omonia is also home to the Athens Central Food Market. This is a location where you can find just about any type of fish, meat, vegetable, or spice imaginable. Some parts of the neighborhood are very attractive, and there are newer restaurants and hotels that are often less expensive options to those situated elsewhere. With all that, however, Omonia is considered by many to be the most dangerous part of the city center. I've seen others on YouTube come down to this area in the middle part of the day, looking over their shoulder going, I hope I don't get mugged. I think that's overstating things a little bit. Yes, the place can use some cleanup, and there's a little bit of an element here that is on the shady side. But it seems to me like this is the part of town that is headed in the right direction. After finishing that on camera bit, I took a couple of steps and saw a guy shooting up right on the sidewalk. There is open drug use, but in all the times I was there, including several visits at night, I never felt threatened. I would not count Omonia as a place to avoid in Athens. Another neighborhood that was very appealing to me was Exarchia. It had some of the most incredible street art that I've seen anywhere. Most of it had deeper meaning than simply being there for artistic reasons. That is related to the reputation that this part of town has for its rebelliousness. It was in Exarchia that the uprising that toppled the Greek dictatorship in 1973 was centered. Even today, there are sometimes clashes between residents and police in the streets here. Don't take that to mean, however, that this is not an inviting part of the city. If you're lucky enough, you'll find yourself here on the day that the Calidromio market is open. That is every Saturday, so make it a point to come here then. This is said to be the most lively farmers market in Athens. All sorts of produce and other goods were offered by the numerous vendors. In several spots, there were entertainers, adding to the atmosphere. Exarchia is one of those places that is a blast to visit, but where residents are tuned in to larger issues and ready to take action if they feel that social or political matters require it. I went to the Kolonaki neighborhood for one reason. That was to hike up to the highest point within the city. Mount Lycabettus stands at 277 meters, or 908 feet. There are several pathways to the top. The way up is not too taxing. It's a wide paved path with steps along the way. I heard it described this way: going to the top of this hill is just a little bit less than going to the top of the Acropolis twice. It took maybe 15 or 20 minutes to get to the top from the lower reaches. There were a couple of treats waiting there as a reward for the minimal effort. The Chapel of St. George is a beautiful little church that sits right at the peak. Many people make the hike to the top of the hill, and most will take a few minutes to admire the church and to look inside. What draws the crowd, however, are the views from the top. It is simply astounding to get here and see all of Athens spread out below. There are incredible sights in every direction. Looking one way, it is possible to gaze down upon the Acropolis and all the history amassed there. When I made my ascent, though, the sun was setting in that direction. so it was difficult to make out the Parthenon and everything else that is situated alongside it. There is a funicular or cable car that is available to ride to the top of Mount Lycabettus, but it was not running when I went. From what I saw, the rest of the Kolonaki neighborhood is stunning. I've seen lists where Piraeus is claimed as a neighborhood of Athens, but in fact, it's a municipality all its own. Figures show it's actually the 4th or 5th largest city in Greece. I didn't really consider going there initially, as I thought about it only as the point where people catch ferries to the islands. Turns out it is much more. This is a major transportation hub, as Piraeus is the 5th largest passenger port in Europe and one of the top 25 in the world. I was most impressed by what is called Marina Zia. It fills a harbor with private watercraft of all types. There is everything here from small fishing vessels to enormous, individually owned yachts. This marina area is massive. I walked around the entire harbor and it is at least a mile. There are boats of all sizes, but some of the yachts, the biggest I've ever seen. I was overwhelmed by the size of some of the yachts as well as the vast number of boats docked here. The marina is surrounded by high-end restaurants and bars, with plenty of condos in the area too. I enjoyed other parts of Piraeus. Climbing the hills away from the water gave some spectacular views of the city and the Aegean Sea beyond. I also found a number of exceptionally gorgeous churches. There were 2 of them bracketing a small square near the port. The Municipal Theater of Piraeus is a remarkable building. It sits at the center of the city and has seating for 600. It was built in 1895. There is also a tremendous market located here, with fish from the Mediterranean being the highlight. The best part about all this is that it is located right at the end of 2 lines of the Athens metro, so getting here is cheap and easy. I will never grow tired of that beautiful blue water. It's not a neighborhood, but I thoroughly embraced the Athens National Garden. This site features 38 acres of green space. The garden is pretty sizable and it's in a great location. It's located just a short distance away from the Acropolis metro station. What this does is it provides a welcome refuge from the busier parts of the city. Walking through the garden is a magnificently peaceful experience. The greenery is calming. Statues and fountains scattered throughout the area keep it very interesting. This is a place just for strolling or sitting and reflecting. If you need more, there is Zappion Hall, which is situated at one end of the garden. This phenomenal structure was built in 1878 and played a key role in hosting the first modern Olympic Games in 1896. Today it has over 4,000 square meters of exhibit space, which was filled with numerous pieces of art when I visited. The beautiful atrium is definitely worth seeing. For those who are experiencing overload from all the historic sites of Athens and the crowds that are associated with them, the National Garden is a wonderful respite. The Kypseli neighborhood is a cool part of the city that residents say has undergone a revival of late. I particularly like this area. It had green space and a park-like atmosphere right in the middle of housing, shops, and restaurants. I might not have even come to this neighborhood if not for this place and what is happening there. In this case, it is the Athens Beer Weekend, Christmas edition. From what I hear though, there are always things going on here, from events to pop-up shops. I mentioned the Athens Beer Weekend in my last video. It was such a treat that I attended both days that it was held. It was contained inside the newly revamped Kypseli Municipal Market. The central space there was available for events such as the Beer Weekend. On the perimeter of the building, there were 10 to 12 spots for shops. I got the feel some were permanent and others were temporary pop-up locations. This was a very comfortable part of town. An area that might be a bit more hip and have a little bit more happening is the Peristeri neighborhood. Technically, Peristeri is its own city, much like Piraeus, and they are both of similar size. There is a lot to like about this place. It is full of restaurants and nightclubs. The square that is situated where the metro stops is full of activity and attractive features. The odds are pretty high that I never would have come to this neighborhood except for one thing. The people from whom I'm renting my Airbnb made a very brief mention that this was an up-and-coming part of Athens. I'm glad they made the recommendation. I'm certainly glad that I acted upon it. The feel here is modern and young. I discovered this area late in my stay, so I only came here a couple of times. There was plenty more that I didn't get a chance to discover. I did take the opportunity one afternoon to have a seat in one of the establishments. I found a beer was the perfect way to finish up one of the visits. Don't miss out on taking the metro to Peristeri and checking what it offers for yourself. The final neighborhood I will mention is Sepolia. It's where I stayed for my 5 weeks in Athens. This was the building which housed my Airbnb. It is surrounded by many other residential buildings and is only a 5-minute walk from the metro station. I have a great deal of affection for this place. I would call it a middle-class part of the city. I liked how restaurants and coffee shops and businesses were all mixed together with the places where people live. There were a ton of coffee shops, and I tried many of them. One of my favorites was Mikkel's. There were numerous days that I dropped in for a cappuccino. This grocery had just about everything that I needed and was only a 2 or 3 minute walk from my place. One of the places I liked to go most was this butcher shop. I went here every time that I was going to cook something. They were the most amazing and kind people. They didn't speak English and I don't speak Greek, but we managed very well with the help of Google Translate. I always walked away with a smile on my face. My favorite place to eat was this restaurant. Many days I stopped in to get a souvlaki. The food was always fantastic, and I enjoyed the interaction with the owner and those who worked there. I love finding places like this.
When I see people come inside my store and went out after they have their meal, happy, full of energy, and it makes me happy also.
Every Thursday, the farmers market was held on one of the streets. It seemed to go on forever. Again, just about anything you want, you could find from one of the vendors. Sepolia for me was the perfect place to stay. Real locals, and just a short metro ride from everything that Athens has for visitors.
Here, people know each other with their surnames. We're like a small village.
I enjoyed every moment that I spent in this neighborhood. One of the coolest features of this neighborhood is right behind this wall. Anyone who is an NBA fan will certainly recognize the name Giannis Antetokounmpo of the Milwaukee Bucks. Turns out, he grew up right here in Sepolia. This basketball court is so great. I love that it was decorated with the image of the neighborhood's most famous resident. A building that is adjacent to the court also carries a mural of Antetokounmpo. I hardly ever saw people playing on the court. I was hoping to find the next NBA star to come from Sepolia. How's that for a look at Athens and some of the parts that come together to make such a fascinating city? Still, this is far from a comprehensive look, as there are many other places that I never even had a chance to visit. My hope is that this allows you to see Athens as more than just the Acropolis, or as a place to pass through on the way to the islands. This city is absolutely worthy of its own place on any travel itinerary. I appreciate you stopping by and visiting here on Old, Alone, and Far From Home. I'll see you next time.